without any further ado.
Hey everybody, I'm Greg Hannold. You see my sign, my banner back here behind me. It's got a few of my talking points on it, I guess. What I need to do is just introduce myself. And yes, like Brian said, I'm a candidate for Sheriff of Rowan County in North Carolina. I feel like I'm pretty well qualified, and most of my message is I would like people to vote based on qualifications. If you research for yourself and you think for yourself and you find out that I'm the right candidate, I appreciate your vote. If you do that same thing and you find out that I'm not the right candidate, that's your prerogative, that's your right, that's part of what makes this country great. But I do hope that you listen to what I have to say, and you listen to what these fine folks have to ask me. I'm gonna do my best to answer as honestly and truthfully and without mumbling and stumbling through it, because I've never been alive on anything either. But I can tell you that I am who I am. I don't try to hide anything. I'm not a public speaker by any means. I just really want to get my message out there and let the good people of Rowan County decide who needs to be the leader of our largest law enforcement agency in the county. The sheriff has a lot of responsibilities that I know we're going to talk about. Some of those responsibilities I'm already doing. I'd just like to sort of give you a little bit of my background first, and I don't guess we're on a time limit of any kind, but I grew up in Rowan County. I went to all the North Rowan schools, elementary school in Spencer, middle school in East Spencer, and then again in the high school in Spencer on Whitehead Avenue. I went to Rowan Community College, where I finished my criminal justice associate degree. I left there and went to Catawba College, where I finished a bachelor's degree in administration of justice. I left Catawba College and attended a hybrid program between the North Carolina Justice Academy and Methodist University, where I finished with a Master's of Justice Administration. Meanwhile, I've raised a family and still raising a family. I've got a 23-year-old daughter, a 22-year-old son, who is also now in law enforcement, and an 11-year-old son, and a wife of 25 years, roughly. Through all that and working full-time and going to school, I've learned a lot, and I have become an instructor of many things. I teach quite a few different law enforcement training blocks. I have taught for several years at the curriculum level at Rowan Community College in criminal justice. I still teach in BLET, the basic law enforcement training. I still teach in-house, and currently I'm a captain with the Rowan County Sheriff's Office, the department that I want to lead in 2022, or in 2023 actually is when it'll take place. I guess starting with Spencer Police Department, where I basically grew up. I was a patrolman for a little while. I was a school resource officer, supervisor. I ended up being a drug and narcotics detective for several of the years. And for the last 8 years there, I transitioned from drugs and narcotic investigations to criminal investigations, crime scene, tech duties. Did a little bit of everything there. In Spencer, you pretty much had to do a little bit of everything. Smaller department. But I got a lot of good training there. Got a lot of good experience. I ended up leaving there, took a short stint at Mooresville PD outside the county, which lasted about 6 weeks, and we don't need to discuss that. It was just not a good fit, and I knew it, and everybody else knew it. I came from a small agency to begin with, and they were a little bit bigger and did things a little different than I was used to. Not ashamed of my time there, but it was short. I left there, came back to Rowan County. That's where I fit in. That's where I belonged. I went to Rowan County Sheriff's Office under George Wilhelm. I was a bailiff for 4 months, almost 4.5 months. I did courthouse security, worked the courtrooms, and then with my training and experience in investigations, George, the sheriff at the time, saw fit to move me into a space that was vacated by an older fella who retired, and that was a child abuse and sex crimes investigator. I spent about 4 years investigating those, and I really enjoyed that work. It was very rewarding. When you actually take a perpetrator away from a victim, you feel pretty good about yourself. And those 4 years were very, very rewarding. I felt good about myself. But with all of my training and instruction and things that I could teach, the department training coordinator's position came open, and I put in for that. So I got that. I spent the next 2.5 years in our Landis department, coordinating, setting up, and facilitating all of our department's training. The next thing I did was the sergeant over the civil division. That position came open. I put in for it along with, I think, 12 other people. We had a review board. I ended up getting that job, and I'm pretty proud of that. At that time, we had roughly 10 officers, 3 secretaries, and they were serving about 900 papers a month. People were not quite happy to come to work, and a year after I took over that position, we had 10 officers, 3 secretaries, and we're serving, averaging sometimes 2,900 papers a month, and I feel like people were happier to be there. Those officers and those administrative assistants were happier to come to work, therefore they were more productive. I was upgraded to a lieutenant rank, where I took on concealed carry things on the fringe and some budgetary things that I was doing, and my current position came open. 5 years ago, January 3rd, I became the captain over the jail, both jails as a matter of fact, in Rowan County. It's a 368 bed facility. At that time, we had 76 officers. And probably the reason I was chosen is for the same reason I was chosen to run the civil division. Those people didn't need somebody to teach them how to keep the doors locked or hand out meals and toothbrushes. They needed somebody to sort of organize and get everybody going in the same direction, and get everybody a little happier to come to work, and try to figure out what it would take to make that a great place to work. 5 years later, I'm still working on that, but I think if any of you know somebody who works in the jail, ask them. I encourage you to ask anybody who knows me. I encourage you to ask their opinion of me. So that's where I currently am. They just put courthouse and courthouse security and bailiffs under me, as well as the division I used to be in, training and hiring and recruitment. So now I'm currently over about 120 of the 260 roughly officers and administrative assistants in our agency, and I'm pretty proud of that. Daily operations come through me, as well as several lieutenants and several sergeants that answer to me. So that's kind of me. And I live out in the western end of the county now, where I've got 3 dogs and a couple of my 11-year-old's got a couple pigs, and we got a duck and some donkeys, and I mean we're just hometown people. So unless y'all have a question about me personally, I'm gonna let you ask what you need.
Well, real quickly, going to introduce some of the other presenters, and then I will get my big head out of the screen. Also, another thing, the way we want this to work is, of course, on Greg's page, he's live. The presenters, my buddy Brandon McNeely and Derrick Hawkins, they will be live on theirs page. on their pages. We really want questions from you guys. This way he can answer questions from different communities and get to talk to a lot of different people at one time. And feel free to ask any questions you would have concerning law enforcement in this county. And we'll go into in just a little bit the roles that what the sheriff actually is over and what he does. But if you have questions concerning how law enforcement is handled in this county, this is a great opportunity to get some clarification on that. So I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to switch this around to our first presenter is Brandon McNeely, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Brandon McNeely, Blue Collar Cycle Company here in Salisbury. Been here for a couple years now, or a little over a year at the shop, and looking forward to this.
All right, my name is Derrick Hawkins. I'm a pastor of a church called the Refuge Church, actually in Greensboro, North Carolina, but we have locations in Salisbury, North Carolina, and of course in Kannapolis, Concord, North Carolina as well. Born and raised in Salisbury, North Carolina, love this great city, and just wanted to see what we can do to help our city become better in law enforcement and then also community engagement. So that's why I'm here today, just to ask the sheriff-elect a few questions and see how we can get our community re-engaged in the process.
And I will shamelessly plug Derrick's book, Welded. It's a great book. I encourage it. It's available on Amazon.
Amazon, yeah.
And it fits the narrative and fits what we're doing here today to a T.
Appreciate it.
All right. And these are some questions I had just kind of get the ball rolling. Is one, to educate everyone, tell us about the role that our county sheriff, what is that role? What does the county sheriff really over and what is he in charge of? And maybe a better question is, what is he not in charge of?
What is he not in charge of? All right, so by our state constitution, the sheriff has 3 duties. They're not exactly what everybody thinks. Number 1 is to run the jails, which I've just talked about. That's what I do for him. He's bound by law to house the county jail. Number 2, he's got to run and protect the courts. Again, bound by statute to have the courts open, have the judges protected, have bailiffs and security in the courthouse. And number 3 is to serve civil papers, evictions, executions, things like that. So while everybody, unless you've been to a law enforcement class or a criminal justice class, you may think that the sheriff's department or sheriff's agency has to have a patrol division, has to have a detective division, but that's just not the case. Now, I assume if you want to get elected in any county in the state, you're probably going to need to ensure that you have those things, because people expect when they pick up the phone and call 911, they expect, no matter where they live out in the county, some officer to come show up. But by law, the only 3 things the sheriff has to do is civil process, courts, and jails. So anything other than that is directed basically by the community. The community dictates that we have patrol officers. The community dictates that we have drug interdiction officers. They dictate that we have school resource officers, investigators of all different kinds. What is the sheriff not responsible for? The office of sheriff has a lot of responsibility. Not just talking about the legal things, going out, taking reports, going out. We don't do accident reports. That's one thing we're not responsible for. If we have an accident, we'll call a supervisor out, and we'll also call highway patrol and let them do the accident report. So that's one thing we're not responsible for. But in my opinion, one of the main things that the sheriff does have a responsibility for that he's not bound to do by law is just what we're doing here: community relations. Our sheriff, Kevin Alton, everybody knows him. Everybody likes him. He does a good job. He knows people's families, and that's only possible through building relationships like we're doing. He's retiring this year. He's done a good job of fostering relationships in every area of the county, in every like fire department, in the EMS, and DSS, in the county offices, and Parks and Rec. He's just done a good job of building those relationships, and I think that's probably, in my opinion, one of the more important jobs of the sheriff is keep building those relationships. I'll tell you, and he may not want me to, but we've had, I know of two unfortunate incidents of where somebody, a citizen of the county, was killed, and the suspect's family brought the suspect directly to our sheriff because they knew him and they had that kind of relationship with him. And that's how I think it should be. This county is, while it's pretty big, 140,000 people, it's not so big that people on the west end or people on the north end or south end can't know me and trust me. Okay, it's just not that big. So while my officers' responsibilities would be answering calls, filling out reports, finding lost children, finding lost adults or elderly, directing traffic sometimes, whatever it is that this community needs, my main responsibility, you won't find me probably out writing a report. You'll find me out, no doubt. You'll find me in different spots, trying to foster those community relationships. That's just what I believe in. My 26 years, April 5th, I think it's April 5th, I'll have 26 years in law enforcement, and for 25 and a half of them, I've kept my head down. I've done a good job. I feel like I've worked and I've moved myself up and I've prepared myself for this. I haven't been out in the community shaking hands, and I haven't been in front of the camera trying to get my name out there. So it's a little difficult for me, but I think that's what the role of sheriff is. Building relationships in our community. And keeping everybody that works under me doing the things that our community needs done.
All right.
Does that answer?
And pretty much, and just to clarify, there was a couple icebreaker questions that he knew about. Pretty much from here on out, these will be random questions from you guys and from Brandon and Reverend Hawkins that he didn't have a chance to, kind of research or re-go over this. So just be patient with us. I know you guys are asking a lot of questions, want a lot of things to know, but I also encouraged him, as you get these questions, take your time, think about it, but I promise we'll get through them and do the best we can, and we'll alternate around between the three of us about asking questions, because I already got a couple good questions. But I'm gonna go ahead and get started with some of your questions that you're asking online. So I figure I'll get started, and then we can kind of just tag team here. This is a big one right out the gate. Joel Johnson wants to know, Greg, what specific reforms will you make if elected?
I'm assuming you're talking about within the sheriff's office. I'll answer it that way. If not, you can ask another question. Ask it a different way. Our sheriff has done a good job. There's no doubt of directing resources, but there are a couple things that I believe I would do to sort of enhance that. We have one team. It's called the crew team. If we have a specific neighborhood with an outbreak of some type of crime, a B&E or a car breaking in or a car vehicle theft, we'll send that crew team out to that neighborhood. We'll kind of stay in the shadows. They'll canvass and they'll talk to neighbors and figure out, try to catch somebody in the act, or try to deter them from coming back, or whatever they can do to make that neighborhood feel safer. We've only got one of those. I think we need more of those. Ironically, 10 years ago, I thought we need fewer of them, and that was my mistake. I've seen the good that group does. I know them personally. They're great officers. They're dedicated, and they do other things than that. But I believe that we need some more directed enforcement, because once that one group has been deployed to that neighborhood, there's another neighborhood somewhere that is having the same problem or a different rash of a different problem. And we need to be able to send a group to that neighborhood. I know that manpower is a touchy thing, and we can't just have everybody that we need. So I guess one thing would be tweaking the resources that we have and moving some things around so that we can be a little more proactive than we are. And that's a difficult thing in law enforcement altogether. Generally, the role of law enforcement is reactive. Something happens bad, the police show up. That's reactive. So I think that against our history, we need to direct some resources to be proactive and prevent crime a little more than we do now. The other thing that I would do differently, that I would reform, obviously I've been over the jails now for 5 years, and I've had my eyes open to what happens in there. For 20 years, I brought people to jail, dropped them off, and ran like crazy to get away from jail. And now I find myself over, and I've learned a lot. And the main thing I've learned is probably the vast majority of the people in jail, number one, are good people that have just made a bad decision somewhere along the line. I've done my absolute best to instill in my officers that very thing. When somebody comes to jail, we treat them right. We give them what they need. We give them everything we can within our budgetary restrictions. We don't do things to punish them that we're not supposed to do. And I think that's done pretty well. But the other thing I've learned is I would guess most of the people in our jail have either a mental health issue or a drug abuse and addiction issue. And we are not going to arrest our way out of that. We're just not. We can bring them to jail. I can spend our resources getting their bonds reduced and getting them involuntarily committed if that's the way the community wants to do it. I'd rather spend our resources with social workers in the jail, with people who can help the people who need it where they need it, instead of waiting to arrest them again, bring them back in there, go through the same circle, send them right back out to their community where they have no other resources, arrest them again, bring them back in. That's just not how we're going to fix this. I've started, before the COVID pandemic hit, I started in conjunction with Livingstone College at their request, but it was a great idea and it worked well. We started a social work program with an intern of theirs who would come into the jail and work and meet the inmates and decide whether they needed some counseling on the outside or help finding a job or help with whatever. And when that person left, when we identified a person who needed those services, when that person left, they already had an appointment with somebody else. If they didn't have a ride, they had a number to call to get a ride to it. They had a reason to go and try to get fixed instead of just sit at home and go right back to doing what they were doing. So that's one thing I would spend county resources on that more than we do now. And when COVID hit, we also did the North Carolina reentry program. Some people that come to jail they don't have a license, and they have no idea how they can go about getting one, or an ID, a state ID that you need to get a job. So we set up a classroom down in the lower levels of the jail. A lady comes in before COVID and had classes to do just that. We'd bring females down in a group, teach them how the steps they need to go through, address any individual problems that they had with getting a job or getting childcare or whatever, and she would help them through that, and it worked pretty well. And we do males the same way in a different setting. So there's just a lot of things that we can do that we either don't have the budget to do or haven't convinced the right people to put the money into the budget in the right places. So those are two big things that I would do I'd tweak a little bit, revamp a little bit.
Turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, man, thank you for even fostering these questions. And I know a lot of things is going on inside of our communities. Two questions that I want to pose right off the jump. I just got a text from a question. Honestly, and this is his question, there's extreme distrust between the African American community with the narrative that's going on at this current moment between police officers and the African American community. So what are some ways that we could build the level of trust in our communities and fostering those relationships with people? I heard you make a comment earlier that hadn't been your strength early on, probably because of the nature of everything else that you've been able to do to be inside of the community. So what difference do you feel like you can make with the Rowan County Sheriff's Department and the African American community? Because it's a big part of the community and the span of our communities and things that we can see to hopefully see change in our community. What would you first do to kind of initially start that?
That's a tough question. That's a huge question. I don't know who asked it, but that's being asked all over the country, really.
Right.
And smarter people than me have tried to figure it out, but I can't speak for the rest of the country.
Right.
I can speak for my experience in Rowan County, Spencer, Salisbury areas, China Grove. I've worked around this whole county. We have a pretty good relationship. It can be better, no doubt. The lack of trust is a difficult one, because how do you rebuild trust? How do you build trust? First of all, I don't know that this country has ever really built trust between the police and the African American community. Okay? So we've got to start from the bottom. I mean, I have to have some give and take.
Right.
It can't just be, oh, I'm stubborn and I'm bullheaded and I'm not going to listen to what you have to say. And it can't be, you're stubborn and bullheaded and anything I say is a lie. It just can't be that. That's why I'm here. That's why we're here today at a visitor. That's why we're here today is to start talking about that. And people are talking about it in different areas, but I guess I'm stumbling through this question because it's difficult. Conversations between you and I.
Right.
Conversations between that individual on the phone who asked that.
Who's the teacher? Yeah, at North Rowan, actually.
North Rowan, Cavalier. Well, conversations have to be the beginning, and they got to be open and honest, and we can't get our feelings hurt so easily.
Right.
We just can't, because in a difficult conversation, things are going to be difficult to hear on both sides.
Absolutely.
So my biggest thing would be just meeting people and talking to people and letting you know that I'm genuine. I've got some supporters who can't even openly support me who have said, Greg, I'll support you simply because I've known you since you were a teenager and you've always been the same person. I've prided myself for 25 years, 26 years coming up, on being able to sleep well at night knowing that I treated you the same way I treated her, same way I treated him, same way I treat you, with no difference according to your race, color, creed, whatever. The only way I treat people differently is if their actions dictate that. If their actions dictate that I treat you one way and his don't, that's just how it's got to be. I tell everybody I treat people as nice as I can. But sometimes there are individuals from every area of this community who won't let you treat them nice. Okay, and that, it's unfortunate, but we don't pay our police officers and our sheriff's deputies to lose fights. That's the ugly truth of it. At one time in this country, our police officers and sheriff's office was just protect and serve, right? It was built on catching bad guys, and that's it. Now today, we've got 1,000 other things that didn't fall under any other agency in the community, so they called the police. We're not necessarily equipped to handle those things. We're not equipped to handle mental health issues. Now, we could be in the future if that's what our community wants us to do. But this all goes back to sort of the defund the police rhetoric that we've heard. Not a fan of that. No big secret. I think that we have precious few resources, and the ones we do have here, at least, are directed pretty well. Other parts of the country, not so much. But if you defund the police, if you start taking away from the police, please take away some of the responsibility, because everything that somebody don't want to handle themselves, they call the police. You don't call the firemen, you call the police. You don't call DSS generally, you call the police. If you do call DSS, you call the police first half the time. So, I guess I got off on a tangent, but your question about making relations better, I just got to get out and talk to people and let them know that I'm genuine. I'm not here to hem people up and falsify charges and things like that you see on the TV. And I don't think that our county does that. 100% honestly, without hesitation, I can say in my 26 years, I have not seen an officer be as egregious as I've seen some outside of this state, okay? I've preached for a long time, do the right thing, don't do the wrong thing. In any situation, with my kids, with my officers. And I just hope that people in the community see that I'm genuine about that.
Absolutely.
And I'm ready to talk to people. Some things that people are gonna ask, we're not gonna be able to do.
Right.
But some things that they ask, we can and we should have already, we just didn't think about it. You know, we're human. We're doing the best we can most of the time.
Yeah, I think a follow up and then maybe a comment and then a follow up question, and then I'll pass it to Brian here. Brandon, I think a few of the things that we can do is just the diversity and training within our department, sheriffs and then police departments as well, but mostly because you're a sheriff, we want to kind of look at that. Just looking at the diversity, what does that ratio look like inside of the sheriff department and leadership? And
You talking, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
no, that's just a question. As far as diversity on the sheriffs in who are actually sheriffs inside of Rowan County, what's the diversity as far as the training and how we approach, especially African Americans, because that's where some of the distrust is based upon how police officers handle or have handled people in general. Those are some of the questions that like to see at least answered from the African American community. And I'm not the whole voice of what the African American community is, but questions that I'm being filtered and being a part of this work is what I see as well. So most of the training and diversity training is very, very imperative in any department and anything that we do. I think to kind of look through the lenses of how do we effectively, like you said, about creating action steps and plans inside of our community over policing or arresting, and really kind of building those community relationships and trust in that. I think it's a big part of that is training, but also some actions. But here's some of the things I was looking at. The Rowan County crime rate is about 2% above the U.S. average, and then the state average is well at 23.6%. So what are some ways that you plan on bringing that down? Because our Rowan County property crimes are like 53.3%, and it's the North Carolina state average is 22.7%. and the U.S. average is 37.7, so it's significantly high. So what are some things that we can do to bring that down? And then in 2018 and 19, 27.1% of all juvenile delinquency complaints in the county were school related. So I know that some of this stuff is how do we better partner with our local schools, and then, but overall, I think how do we get that right down to at least below what the U.S. average and even statewide average is, because we're high on both of those or all three of those areas.
Well, let me start by, I would like to go back to your first question, then we'll hit that one if you don't mind. You're right, training. Our state, our county, our city agencies do a pretty good job of training. We, juvenile minority sensitivity training, recognizing mentally ill subjects, things like that, we do train them. The problem with the training is sometimes you train more than you actually work, and that's difficult, because we have to pay officers to train. We have to pay them either comp time or overtime or whatever it is. So budgets have a little effect on that. But you're right, as well as any other mandated in-service training we do. Recruitment is another big issue. I think you said something that kind of went along with that, but recruitment from our minority communities, we just don't have the applicants. I know for a fact that our sheriff now and myself, if I become the sheriff, would love to have minority applicants. We just don't. I guess it goes back to the same trust. I'll tell you this. I hired a young African American man a month or so ago because he went to BLET. When he went to BLET, basic law enforcement training, his family basically disowned him. They pretty much told him, if you're going to be the police, we ain't going to do it, because of their lack of trust. He went anyway. He didn't do a great job in BLET, and he didn't finish. And somebody that I know out there said, hey, you need to look at this guy. He's got some character. And when I did, immediately I called our training and recruitment division. I said, look, this guy's going to be coming to see you. This is what he's done. We need to give him a shot. And he's working fine. I mean, he's working really well. I don't know that he's happy starting out in the jail, and he may end up going to BLET again soon, but that's part of recruitment. We've got to get out and bridge that gap and get people to, if their families are gonna be a hindrance to them, it's hard to deal with. It's hard to overcome. So the African American community and the females, female population in our sheriff's office is not high in the patrol side. We've got several, and they're absolutely top-notch officers. In my jail, I've got, I've got 4 lieutenants total. 2 of those are females. I've got 5 sergeants there total. 3 of those are females. I've got some MDOs, 8 of those, I believe. 2, 3, 4 of those are female, some African American, some not. Again, I go back to the whole thing of, I don't look at your skin color or your gender to decide if you've done the best job. If you deserve a promotion and I can give it to you, you're going to be the one to get it. It doesn't make any difference to me which side of the tracks you came from. So back to your other question. What was that? The second one.
The second one was just the crime rates.
Crime rates, yeah.
Crime rates is where we are in Rowan County compared to the North Carolina state average and then the U.S. state average.
Here's one thing about
What the U.S. average?
here's one thing about crime rates. Although you think they're reported identically across the board, sometimes they're not. Some agencies report different ways, hold back reports different ways, or don't consider these crimes the same as other crimes. So you sort of have to take the crime rate with a grain of salt. That's number one. Number two is Rowan County is a little unique in that we have 140,000 residents in the county roughly, but we've also got 10 municipalities within the county, and a lot of those have their own police agencies and their own police forces. Whereas Cabarrus County doesn't have that. You know, they've got Concord, we're part of Kannapolis, and we got the other half of Kannapolis. Mecklenburg County don't have that. Most other counties don't have a large number of municipalities. So when that statistic is gathered, and I really don't want to sound negative towards any municipality here because they're all great officers, but when that statistic is gathered for Rowan County, a majority of those numbers come from those municipalities that we don't control. Now, part of that question was, how can we fix that? Should we fix it? Number one, yeah, absolutely. Does the sheriff have a responsibility to help fix that? Absolutely. You know, part of, if you live in the city, part of your tax dollars go to the county, right?
Right.
So, if we should, and the sheriff has a responsibility to help, then again, we're back to relationships with individual municipalities and their law enforcement groups. I can tell you that Rowan County Sheriff's Office is now and will be 100% happy to coordinate, and we do it now. Coordinate, we should probably do more of it. Collaborate, focus manpower and focus resources into areas that need it. So I think that's key. And again, establishing and building on the relationships that we got. Who's going to be able to tell us that this person is casing this business? The neighborhood. If that neighbor trusts us enough to call us, if it's me personally, if it's our current sheriff, if it's the Salisbury City Council, whatever, if they trust government enough to call somebody, then we likely can prevent that and make that crime rate go down. If they don't trust us, they're not only are they not going to call us to prevent it, when it actually happens and we're trying to solve it, they're not going to tell us who did it. And that happens daily. They know who did it. They're either scared or they don't trust us. So we gotta build that. If we build that, that crime rate, even though it may be skewed some, it's probably fairly accurate. That crime rate will come down. When the people who commit the crime see that this community is no longer gonna just sit there and take that, they've got a relationship with our sheriff or our chief of police, and they're gonna call them, and chances are we're gonna get caught, then they're likely not to commit the crime. Again, directing resources, building relationships, getting people to trust us again and be comfortable with talking to us. A lot of times that starts with the kids. You know, sometimes the family is a lost cause. Unfortunately, if we don't start early, usually we won't reach them.